It's a good thing I've been doing this for 2 years, because if you follow 3 speakers and you're asked to speak on the same topic, it could be difficult. But I think we'll manage it. I want to start with a news release that came to me of all people. And it came from your MLAs. And it said, we promised to listen to the public and then act on what we heard from British Columbians on how to improve the HST. Now, let me tell you, for those 7,000 volunteers that went through this province 2 years ago now, getting signatures on street corners, in the sleet, in the snow, in the wind, in the rain, throughout the whole of this province, it didn't seem like the government was listening. For the 700,000+ people that came out and signed the petition to end the HST, we don't want any part of it, we don't like it, we don't want it. The government didn't listen. And they know that the government didn't listen. And for the people that were polled time and again by pollsters throughout this country, they were asking people throughout this province the question, do you want the HST? 85% said no, we don't want the HST. And the government wouldn't listen. So now, of course, they say, we listened. They had no choice but to listen, because when the petition was complete, it went to the Legislative Committee. And Chris and I were there with others, and the committee was sitting there debating, and they were politicians from both sides, mostly, however, from the Liberal side. And they were debating whether they should put it to the legislature or put it to an initiative vote. And they debated back and forth, and they made it look good, particularly, of course, the governing people. They tried to make it look good. They tried to put a good cover on it. And we were still hoping that somehow they might come to their senses and say, well, we could save the populace millions of dollars, their dollars, by taking it back to the legislature and having our representatives stand up behind that big fancy desks, which cost us a lot of money, and say, no, we've listened to the people. We know in every poll 85% were against. We have petitions with 700,000+ signatures. We're voting for the people. We're voting to end the HST. And we'll save $40–50 million. That's what we were thinking when we were sitting there, because that's so reasonable. But no, they weren't reasonable. They decided that it had to go to an initiative vote. And Chris and I stormed out of that room, and we went to the media, and all the media was waiting, and that was good for us. Because when you don't have the forces with you, such as the government had, you need the media to try and help out occasionally, and they hadn't been that helpful up until then, at least not the big media. So we stormed out, they were waiting, and we said, no, we're not going to stop at this, we're going to keep fighting, we're going to do whatever it takes, we've got to end this, and the government has to deal with it reasonably. And all the while we were speaking, we didn't know this at the time, we were tuned into the Premier's office through the speakers. And the Premier's office was then invaded by the media, and the media caught the Premier at the right time, and he said, no, we'll accept the vote, simple majority. If the simple majority votes to get rid of the HST, we'll accept that. So that was a good move for us, because then otherwise it would have been a plural majority, which means you have to have a plurality in every constituency as well as provincially, and that would have been impossible. The legislation is very bad. So we did in the end get to the point where we would have an initiative vote. And then, of course, the leadership campaign happened, because the Premier had to step down on account of all the pressure from the HST. And a leadership contest came, and during the leadership contest, we were promised a referendum vote, which is a little better again in that it happens now. However, the Premier comes to me after that vote and says, Bill, you know what, Bill, we want to be fair about this. We're going to have a level playing field. There's going to be the pro side, the proponent side, which is you, and there's going to be the opponent side. We don't know who that is yet. But we'll pick the opponent and the proponent. We'll have a process to do that. And you'll each get an equal amount of money. Well, that sounded not too bad. But then they went into the cabinet room and they passed an order in council. And the order in council removed all the rules from the Referendum Act. So no longer was there any control on the amount of money that any particular group could spend. It was open sesame, spend as much as you want. And no longer was there any way of controlling the ad content, what it is they could say or how they could say it. Now when we were going through the initiative vote, there was all sorts of controls. We could only spend so much, we could only spend it here, we had to account every which way, no one could be paid, we couldn't have polling booths, we couldn't have this, all sorts of rules. But now with the referendum, by an order in council, they removed the rules. So we get 250,000, courtesy of the government, courtesy not the government, you the people, the taxpayers, we get $250,000 to do whatever needs to be done by way of advertising, particularly to get the message out to the people as to why we are against the HST. The other side is the BC Chamber of Commerce. They're the organizers, and the big corporations, and they're the opponents. They get $250,000, but you've seen the advertising. We've spent our $250,000. The government has spent, maybe not yet spent all of it, but they're close to it, and they'll probably go over. They're $10 million of your money, but that's an information campaign, they say. And the big business group has spent millions of dollars. Millions. We think $10 million, but I don't know, an ad during the hockey game, an ad during the riot in Vancouver, hey, those are costly ads. That's a big bundle of money. But there's no limits on what they can spend. So why is this all happening? Well, the big business people, I think it's relatively simple. When you stand to gain billions forevermore, because once a tax, always a tax. It goes on forever, and it only goes up. If it ever comes down, it's only temporarily until somebody else puts it up again even more than what it was previously. I know, I've seen it happen, I was there. So they know that this tax is forever. They know it's going to bring them billions of dollars. Now these are big corporations. If it were small businesses in Chilliwack that were doing all the benefiting, we couldn't really argue effectively what it is we've been arguing for the last 2 years. But you know what? A small business also gets the tax back, but here's the difference. If there's $1 billion in a Chilliwack economy, and I take $120 million out of that $1 billion of Chilliwack economy, there's less for the people to spend at their local shops, at their local stores, at their local service centers. Less to spend to get things done by others at your home, in your garden, or wherever. It takes that money out, and there's no place to get it because somebody from Ontario or Newfoundland isn't going to come shopping in Chilliwack. Chilliwack, or any town in BC, particularly smaller towns, are dependent on the local consumer. And businesses don't make jobs. That's a mistake the government makes time and again. Businesses don't make jobs. Consumers make jobs. If there's somebody producing something in Chilliwack and there's nobody to buy it, it only goes into a warehouse and gets stored. And people aren't hired. That doesn't create jobs. That doesn't create economic activity. So the big corporations, as Chris pointed out, stand to gain billions over time. And most of these big corporations in our province particularly, granted it's a little different in Ontario because they have some manufacturing, but in our province particularly, it's mostly resource industries that we depend upon. They export their goods to the US, and I get terribly upset when I watch TV and I see a picture of Chilliwack, and the harbor is loaded with barges and ships full of raw logs. Yeah. And they're exporting these raw logs,